welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to having a really diverse community here. We have researchers, we have clinicians, we have patients, caregivers, all of the above. I don't think that everybody is familiar with all those on the call or the entities that are being represented here, but my name is Phuong Gallagher and I'm the president of the Colon Club. Co-presenting with me today is Kimberly Miller. And Kim, I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself because I can't do it justice.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kim Miller. I'm an assistant professor at Keck School of Medicine of USC. So nice to see everybody today.
So Kim and I have talked about this webinar for some time, actually, because we've had a long relationship developed over time, and it was just kind of funny because we were shocked and appalled at some of I guess some of the traditional ways of doing things, and we kind of just upset the apple cart a little bit with how we wanted to do things. And that was a much more friendly way. It was much more close-knit and deep-rooted at the very beginning. And I think that yielded some really different results from what you might typically find. So I suppose we could start at the very beginning. As a patient advocate who was new to USC, relatively speaking, on the advocate front, I was curious as to how I could get involved. I didn't really know where to begin, but Dr. Fryer's name came up, in conjunction with the survivorship clinic, and I kind of took a look at who might be able to help direct me a little bit. And he actually pointed me to CSAC, and we actually have Mary Alto here, who is the chair of CSAC. And he also pointed me to Kim Miller, said you guys should talk, that she's got some research going on, let's get going. And she and I just sat down and started brainstorming. Kim shared some of the research that she was starting to think about that was in the beginning stages of the grant writing process. Kim, do you want to share a little bit about how that part of it came about on your side?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about how we met, and I believe it was 2018. And at the time, I had just gotten a research grant from Children's Oncology Group. They have an AYA, Adolescent Young Adult Training Award. And I was actually pretty new on faculty. My faculty appointment started in 2017. And I started working, I was always a cancer researcher, but my dissertation was in melanoma. However, I was moving towards colorectal cancer for a number of different reasons. One reason was because Dr. Fryer was my mentor, and he talked with Dr. Lenz, who's also on this call. And Dr. Lenz and Dr. Fryer were like, we want some more research happening in, young colorectal cancer. And at the time, there was studies that were coming out that were showing that there was some rapidly increasing, really kind of concerning trends in colorectal cancer for young people. And that caught my eye, and I thought, this may be, I was always trained to go where one is needed, right? So I thought, okay, this may be a cancer type where more research is needed. So Dr. Fryer and I spoke. And he said, I want to introduce you to Phuong. Phuong Gallagher is, and at that time, I think he was profiled in On the Rise, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Like there was a profile. So he said, I think there might be some good connectivity because you have this new grant in colorectal cancer, and Phuong is a colorectal cancer advocate, and she's very involved with this group, the Colon Club. So that's how, and my study was on quality of life, and what better for me than to meet a colorectal cancer survivor advocate who I could meet with and talk with, and have some ideas as I was just beginning launching this study. So that's kind of how we met. I remember we met in his office the first time and sat down and talked, and I got your big, beautiful, amazing, magazine. And I was like, very new to the colorectal cancer community. So Phuong and Colon Club was my introduction.
So for those of you who are wondering about the Colon Club, we are a national advocacy organization. We focus on the early age onset community because the challenges that we face when you're diagnosed so young is very different from those that you face when you're older. You know, there's less financial security. There's a whole lot of questions that simply are different. So we focus on those that are diagnosed under the age of 45. And we're doing that in keeping with the American Cancer Society's recommendation of screening at age 45 and above. So yes, just a quick background. Our production on the Rise is a magazine. It's a resource magazine that includes articles as well as stories about those caregivers and survivors diagnosed under 45. And so that kind of gave me a little bit of opportunity and a speaking platform to start to reach out and find out a little bit more. So, you know, Kim and I, when we sat down and talked one-on-one, I think that we started to feel each other out a little bit because we just simply weren't sure. You know, sometimes as an advocate, you think about the intimidation of all these people who are so smart, the researchers who have done all these studies, they must know everything that there is to know, right? And so you start to think about yourself and go, well, I'm just a cancer patient, what do I know? And the truth is, you know a lot. You know about your disease, you know how it feels, you know what your experience is. And these are things that you can share that really impact the research. And we'll go into that in a little bit. But honestly, my first feelings were, she's so nice and she's so welcoming. And so that felt so inviting to me as an advocate that it kind of pulled down those, oh my gosh, walls, you know? And so I think that was my first real experience with Kim. And I think that really helped to develop our relationship to where we were doing so much more.
Yeah, it's funny because when Phuong and I were talking about this, preparing for this webinar, and we were talking about the issue of patient advocates being, you know, intimidated or nervous, I said, well, it's actually the exact same thing, I think, a lot of times for researchers. You know, my first impression of Phuong was that, oh, she's so lovely. She's such a great person. But you know, colorectal cancer was new to me, and I didn't want her to think I was a dummy. You know, it was like, there was so much I didn't know. And so I was actually really intimidated to sit down and talk. And you know, I'm not an oncologist. I'm not a medical oncologist. You know, I'm a population-based researcher. And I knew, you know, I knew general issues with cancer, and I knew melanoma pretty well, but I didn't know, there's so much I didn't know about colorectal cancer, so much I was learning. I didn't want to say the wrong thing, and I didn't want her to think that because it was evolving that Phuong would have a role on the study that I was launching, that she would be the patient advocate. And I really just didn't want her to think like, I'm wasting my time with this dummy who doesn't really know anything about this cancer type, right? So I guess that brings us to one point that we've talked about, which is honesty, right? I think one nice thing about our relationship was from the start, we were able to establish, I think, like I remember we sat and we had coffee in the quad at the medical school. And we were both able to honestly discuss, and I was pretty honest with Phuong to say like, oh, this is new to me. And that was helpful, right? Because Phuong was very warm about it and was like, oh, great, you know, like, and immediately was able to be a guide. So I thought of Phuong as my guide to colorectal cancer, to the experience, to the patient community, as a link and a guide right away. So I just wanted to say, like, researchers are often intimidated as well, I think, working with advocates.
Yeah, and that honesty, I think, really allowed us both to open up because it let me know where you were so that I didn't feel stupid, like, am I talking down to this person? Because it's like, duh, of course I already know all these things. So I think that it really helped us to be able to share openly and to not worry about offending each other, because it was one of the first studies that I really got deeply involved at this level beyond just a, you know, generic signing off kind of a thing. And so I think that's one of the other things that really was different for us. Kim made sure that I felt like a full partnership, that I was invested in this. And so that made it really easy for me to, as an advocate, jump in and be encouraged. What more can I do? How else can I help? And so talking about this, I spoke earlier about just kind of signing off. Some studies that I've been requested to be that patient advocate on, they will actually send me a template and say, here's your letter, just sign your name. And that just always struck me as odd, because I didn't write this. Why would I sign it? This doesn't make any sense as I'm reading through it. And Kim actually really encouraged me to go ahead and just, here's a template if you need it, but feel free to throw it out and put your own words down if you want. So it really allowed me to think about not just the study, but how it reflects on my life and that of our community. What's the impact, and why do we need this study? And so from a patient's perspective, I was able to really communicate why this quality of life is so important. And what I have seen in the general community is that clinicians are oftentimes very, very focused on saving our lives, quite frankly. Let's get after the cure. And so because time is limited, you end up not being able to have the time to address the quality of life issues. Things like infertility, things like long-term survivorship. These are often things that you just don't have time to discuss. But it leaves us in a vacuum, especially those of us who are of age for, childbearing age, and not knowing what to expect. It comes as a shock, right? So this was something that was really important to me, and I was able to communicate that through my letter. And Kim, I'm sure that you saw some impact and difference in just a generic letter versus one that's a little more tailored.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. I mean, so I've been through more than one letter with Phuong, and I'll tell you that, like, your letters always, I mean, they're very moving letters, they are, I'm used to, I mean, oftentimes we give templates to whomever because we know everybody's busy. And so, it's a lot to ask to write a letter. And so we want to make things easy. By the same token, Phuong takes a long time, and really, it's more than tailors it. Like, you're writing your experience to it. And I will say that it's recognized. It's recognized at the level of, recently I had a grant funded, and one of the things they mentioned was Phuong's letter, which was amazing to me. They just said, it really looks like this researcher is working closely with patient advocacy, and you can see that. And they mentioned Phuong by name, as a partner in the research, which was very meaningful to me, because I think that patient advocacy has come a long way, and I shouldn't say that. I should say researchers' role with patient advocates have come a long way, because when I started earlier on, it was kind of like it sort of started and ended with the grant letter. Like, once you got the grant, it was like, great, we have the grant now. Like, we'll see you. And so I think it starts with that. That's just the beginning of the relationship, is consolidating it there. That letter of support is just sort of, the initial phase of it. So that was really just the beginning. But then Phuong came on as a full partner in the research, because I was also very dependent on her for helping us develop our survey that we were using for young adult colorectal cancer patients on treatment and survivors. So I remember very vividly developing that survey with Dr. Barzi. Dr. Barzi was a key mentor as a clinician on this, but it was a lot of back and forth between us as the research and oncology folks developing a survey, but that was also, Phuong was giving us perspectives on areas of importance that we needed to focus on. And I think was really like my key example here, what was really formative was the issue about sexual health, because we had gone back and forth about whether we were going to include sexual health, whether we felt it was too invasive or intimate or difficult questions. And if we did, which measure we would use. And, Phuong said immediately to us, no, you have to include it. It's so on patient minds. It's so important. This is an area that's so under researched, and we talk a lot about it in our forums. Like, it's really, so for me, it was like, without her, I might have left that off. I would have lost some very valuable data and something that was of key importance to patients.
And just what a wonderful experience for me to feel the immediate impact of my ability to share, right? Just being able to say that and impact the direction of the questions in this section. It had, beyond changing the survey, it really, for me, validated what the patients are experiencing, what they're feeling. Because when you actually, as a patient, see this in the survey, you kind of go, oh my gosh, like, they're actually recognizing it, they're talking about it. And so it really feels like they're listening to us. And so that makes it a lot easier as a patient to fill out these surveys, because you feel like it matters. It's not just lip service. It's not just filling another form out just for the sake of supporting research. You really feel like there is value. And I think that was really important. Kim talked about me coming on as a full partner, and I felt that that was really another key aspect of our relationship in this research and otherwise. Like, it just felt like, okay, I'm a full partner. That means that I have equal voice, right? I'm not just that person in the corner waiting to be called on, like, oh wait, can I share? It takes away that that intimidation, that shyness. It made me feel welcome to share everything that I thought might be of concern. One of those things had to do with language. So in language barriers, we find that there are different ways that we speak within the communities that are not technically medical terms. I think of Bari butt and Ken butt as, a classic example. Outside of the community, it's certainly not a medical term. What do you mean, Bari butt? What is that? Well, you can see it, but it doesn't function, right? So, and so it's kind of one of those funny things, but
that was a very new term for me. See, that's why I needed you, because I didn't even know ostomate. Like, there was so much I didn't know that I learned from you immediately. So super helpful.
Yeah, but then, I mean, when you can tailor the survey a little bit, just minor adjustments in language, it makes just that connection. So, these aren't necessarily earth-shattering, moving things, but all these minor things can add up to have a really great impact in smoothing out the process. I personally think that it can really help with recruitment, and we certainly will go into that. But I think that these language barriers sometimes, it's hard for us, because as patients, for us to learn about our disease, what do you do outside of talking to your doctors? You're sitting there trying to slog through these abstracts and articles, and they're really not patient friendly in the language. So in working with Kim, what we're able to do is not only make it a little more friendly during the research process, but we can summarize the abstracts and articles for the big conferences. Submit to ASCO, great, but then we can also disseminate to the community in patient-friendly language. So when we put together our results, that's what we're doing. And it's not going to be, over your head trying to figure out what does this mean. So I think that's another big thing that we were able to overcome together in bridging that gap.
Yeah, I agree, and I think even I completely agree with recruitment, and also with my study, which was over time. So I had 4 assessment periods, and even though the pandemic kind of tanked it a little bit, and I only got half of the patients, all of the patients stayed for all 4 assessments, even throughout the pandemic, which was amazing. And I think that, Phuong did a lot of work and looked at the language and looked at terminology and helped me with things like, I don't think patients will understand that. That's not really you know, something that terminology that we would use. Why don't you replace, you know, there's a lot of like track changes from Phuong that was really, really helpful. Or looking at different measures and saying, like the sexual health one that we were going back and forth on, Phuong had a clear preference and we went with that. And I think that really helps recruit. I think patients can, you know that, or, you know, whether it's conscious or not, that we know that language is patient friendly. So, you know, a good example that I think most researchers have dropped this term, hopefully, but just the trajectory of words like what we used to call compliance with care, right? It's such a I mean, you know, that's such a research oriented, it's so not about like patients, and it's so judgmental sounding, right? So then like compliance went to like, okay, let's call it adherence, like as if that was better. That's still not better, right? And so working through that and thinking about, okay, you know, what's terminology that isn't actually you know, that talks about patients' choice to engage with care, or the, you know, the care recommendation, like to try to take, you know, so that's one example. But there's a lot of points at which on the survey that Phuong could look at the language and help us shape the language so it was patient-centered, patient-friendly, understandable, and there was the confidence behind it that whomever was developing this, you know, was working in tandem with people who had had that lived experience. And nicely, I always have like an end at the end of the survey to say, you know, do you have any thoughts, other questions, anything? And we got a lot of nice feedback there. And I really attribute that to Phuong. I mean, to having a patient advocate really go through that survey. So I'm really proud of the work we did with that. Because saying this is really thorough, you know, you really touched on points that were important to me. To me, that means we did a good job. And I couldn't have done it without Phuong.
Yeah, and just it's such a great environment to be working with somebody who's open to this. So, you know, I think that it helps to not be confronted with oh, well, this is, how dare you make a change? You know, I mean, I wouldn't expect you to hit that kind of attitude, but, you know, just be aware that there are certain things, if you're an advocate, that cannot be changed. And that might be because it's a validated survey, which means that you're either going to use these set of questions or you're not. There's no choice.
And that's always the worst thing, right? Because you would pick things out and just say like, and I'd say like, oh, you know, that's the one we can't change, because when you change it, you know, it's hard sometimes, but it really helps you, because then you realize like, well, maybe this isn't, you know, maybe this isn't the right measure to use. So it's interesting in that way. You know, we do have to kind of work with what we have to an extent. And oftentimes Phuong would pick things out and I'd be like, yeah, you're right. That is a really weird question.
Yeah, and or even just the focus of the questions, like again with the sexual health, because that just seems to stand out. You know, on one side, men and women, the questions that were asked were completely opposite, where one was qualitative, the other was more, you know, can you physically, you know, it was just like, wait, it's important on both sides.
Right. And you figured that out. I didn't even think about that, but it was like, one was very much like, for men, it was very functional, right? Or
No,
it
the
was
other way.
it was right. Like for women, it was very functional, but for men, it was very much, and, you know, and Phuong, and they were supposed to be exactly, you know, comparable, but they weren't. And we realized that. And the other thing is we had rejected another measure because Phuong looked at it and was just like, it's so technical. Like it's, you know, it's just, I don't think patients are going, you know, this is not getting to the real issues and the real discussions that we're having on inpatient spaces and inpatient forums. So we were able then to say, okay, let's not use that one and use this one. That was very, very helpful. And we got people answering that, no problems. People appreciated those questions.
Yeah, I think that it continues to be surprising because it's one of those areas that there is that communication gap again that we were talking about earlier, where the focus is so much on your physical curing and saving your life that this piece often gets, you know, put by the wayside. But quality of life is so important, and you know, as patients, we have to encourage each other to really speak out to their medical team. And if you're not getting what you need, to advocate for yourself simply by saying, hey, this is important to me. I understand that you may not be the person to talk to, but can you redirect me to the right person? Things like that carry over into when you're into these researching experiences. I think that for those that are clinicians involved in clinical trials, the patient advocate can be very powerful there. Again, the simple little things. I was an advocate on a CAP, and they were taking us through the steps of the clinical trial. Here's what the patient would go through. And, they were talking about 2 to 3 times a week, the patient would have to go and do labs or follow up, at the hospital on yada, yada, yada. And I very simple questions. Okay, so you're coordinating this with their oncologist and their visits, right? Blank stares, like, wait, what? I was like, so you're potentially having a patient go to the hospital every single day of the week if you're not coordinating at different times, potentially incurring all the costs of travel, not just gas mileage, all that, but parking fees. And it's a lot. This is going to impede your recruitment. And so that minor adjustment then becomes something that is a non-issue, right? So I think that there's different ways that we can really just think through our lives. And like we said, we're the experts in our own lives and what our experience is. So if you logically think through, what would I have to do to participate in this study? What would I have to do to participate in this trial? Why would I say no? And then you can start kind of reverse engineering that with your researchers and clinicians to figure out, okay, how can we overcome this barrier? And that improves your recruitment. So Kim, I'm going to send this over to you on talking about our recruitment, because I love how you tell this story and it cracks me up every time.
Which one? Which story? we have like 15 stories.
That's true. Recruitment for when we actually shared the survey with the Colon Club.
Our survivor recruitment, right, for the Colon Club thing. Yeah, so we actually had 2 studies. We had our on therapy recruitment, which Phuong helped a ton with, just in those ways too, of understanding like when was the optimal time. Like, I wasn't really sure, like, oh, if people are having infusion, is that a good time? Well, it turns out that's a great time, like for me to go stop by, and it used to be before COVID. But then what happened was we had to pivot the research and decide to do our survivorship study online because of COVID. We were going to do it at our hospitals, but we couldn't do it anymore. So we decided to do it I was working with Phuong, but then in partnership with the Colon Club, and to have our survey advertised on the Facebook site of the Colon Club. And then they would, survivors who were interested could go, and if they met the eligibility requirement, would take our survey. So we worked for a few weeks all together. It was my team at Phuong's team at Colon Club, getting graphics. Phuong's team did such a great job with the sort of like social media. I mean, some researchers are really creative and good about that kind of stuff. Like, I'm not one of them. You know what I mean? Like, I will write everything in the most boring way possible. And like Phuong's team, like really just, like punched it up and made it like something you'd want to do. And then we opened the survey, and it was like watching the stock market, or like, my project manager was like, 1 hour into it, we had 100 participants, and I was like, are you serious? I was just thinking, okay, this is going to take, by that day, we ended up closing, but at the end of the day, it was like 200, more than 200 pages. And that was where my incentives flatlined. Okay. We had to close it within like 3 hours. Right.
And by the way, that incentive was pretty much nothing. It was like a $20 gift card.
It's like a $20 gift card. And we had so many people. So it was like casino time. So then another one of my mentors was like, you know what, I'm going to give you, let's double it. So I'm going to give you incentives from my study, and let's get more, because this is really, obviously there's a real this is obviously an opportunity and people want to speak out. So we reopened the survey 2 days later and got another couple of hundred of participants. So it was just this amazing, very rapid recruitment process. And, again, I think that, a lot of it was that we were on like an advocacy site that was very, very, tight. And also that your team, Phuong and her team, knew how to craft messages and attract advocates in ways that we don't necessarily, I don't think. Our language and our whole approach tends to be, again, like, how you'd expect a scientist to approach something. It's like not that exciting, but it was great. So yeah, so that, yeah.
When you said that your target initially was 100, I literally laughed out loud and just said, we could hit that like that. Because, again, we know our community. And thank you to Danelle, who's on. She's our social media manager who just
is
killed
Danelle
it.
here? Yeah, Danelle was great. Thank you, Danelle. Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, we hit 145 minutes. It was quick because we were looking at our research platform. Hey, Danelle, thank you. Yeah, that was a great job. It was really good. And it was fun because we were all talking with each other, and, I was texting and just like, Phuong, we have 45 people already. Now we have 100. Now we have, so it was super exciting. And
yeah.
What's cool from that whole experience is we have data, and we're doing two things where we're doing scientific publications from that, but we're also preparing community feedback. So we're going to feed back the data in, and a lot of it too is we have, results from, pandemic experiences, quality of life, generally medical delay. We found a lot of important things, and we're able to share that both with the scientific community, but also we're going to work to prepare it for the patient community in very sort of like patient friendly, understandable terms so that we can feed back. That's another, I think, incentive we gave patients was, we said, we're going to tell you what the results are.
And that's a huge one, actually. And that would be more meaningful to me as a patient than a $20 gift card. Because, how often do you put your data out there, your personal, very personal data out there, never to see it again, never to know what happened to it, what was done with it. And it was very important to Kim in this case to say, okay, you know what, this is about the patients. It should be for the patients. So one of the things was just, if you take the survey, you get to see the results first and foremost, before we even publish it everywhere else. She was willing to share that. And it was just really this shared experience in that she was also like, our data is your data. We did this in partnership. So you have access to take a look and see, what are your questions that we can answer with this data? How can we do that together? So it added another layer of what can we do as an advocacy organization to try to data mine and help our community in really focusing on what matters to us. So that was huge. Also, while I'm on the topic of benefits, don't underestimate how great it is for an advocate to be able to put your name on a study, to be able to just say, I was a part of this, to put that on your resume, because it opens up the opportunities for that advocate to grow and to do more. It doesn't cost you anything, researchers. It only actually enhances everything that you're doing, because you're really taking into consideration the end partnership of who needs that, who is this about, who does it help. So your end users really benefit from seeing people who are in their community on the study.
Yeah, and I've seen that evolve a lot. I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense to publish things scientifically or otherwise that don't have Phuong's name on it, because she was a part of the scientific team. I mean, she guided our research. She was part of the team. We always do science in teams, and she was part of it. but I really have seen that evolve over time, in which I think that advocates weren't always, again, it was, I think in the early days, there was an amount of lip service that was paid to just kind of like, we have the advocate, and then now the advocate can, now we have the funding, or now our study is starting, and, the advocate maybe gets acknowledged, but is not a co-author or a co-producer generally. So, I mean, for us, we couldn't have done this without the Colon Club. The Colon Club was essential. I mean, it was Colon Club, stakeholders, participants, people, patients and survivors involved. But we also had the full support, and it was a co-branded study with the Colon Club. So, it made sense. It just makes sense. And, I was like, it's proud, like when you do something with a team, you're proud to stand amongst your team. So, I was happy to be amongst my team, many of whom are here, Dr. Lenz, Dr. Barzi, Phuong, I mean, Julia Stahl. It's exciting to be able to do that and share it together as, teamwork.
So I'm going to pause here for a second because Dr. Barzi, looks like you have a question or comment.
Yes. So I think this is a great story to be said on how advocacy have evolved over years, from being something on the side to something at the center of the research, regardless of what kind of research we're doing. But I think it's also time to get a return back to medical community for interventions that advocates can bring forward. I would give you an example. The the sexual issues is not something I don't want to ask about. I'm not shy asking about, but if I ask and they say something, I don't know what to do with it. It's not about sending them to somebody else. It's just, I know there is no intervention to address that unfortunate consequence of the diagnosis or treatment. So I think if the advocates would return the interventions they find successful back to us, and we can collate them together and find themes in that, that provides us with tools that we can then give back to the patients. I always give this example. Dr. Lenz knows it very well. Our patients experience constipation after getting chemotherapy because of nausea drugs. And we warned them about it. I never thought that I can do anything about it until one patient told me, what I do is I take the laxative the day before, and then my constipation is not bad. I didn't know about that. It's not written anywhere in the literature, but she taught me that. And I tell that to everybody that I treat. So I would like to see that kind of interaction, that the patients would come forward and tell us what interventions they do, what things they do to overcome the challenges, and teach us what we can pass on to the patients. But maybe it can be something that we can do research. We can do a randomized study doing this versus not doing this, and what's the effect of that.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge point to make. And I think that is an example of one of the things that can be done with an advocacy organization along in partnership with clinicians, because I think there are questions on both sides. Like if you have asked the question, then we could say, oh yeah, well, let's crowdsource and see who does what, because we love talking about what works for us and sharing that with each other. There's no reason why we wouldn't share that with the doctors, except it probably just never occurred to us to do that as a collective group. So let me ask this, as a group, once we collect this information, what's the best way to communicate that to the doctors, and make that practice a change rather than just, oh, okay, that's nice?
Can I say something before maybe respond? So I think these are all very important issues. I think one of the critical elements is that I think if the patient and the doctor and the scientist and the social worker are one team and working together, that communication opens up very easily. If it's not treating you and you're getting the treatment from me, but being part of the solution, where the communication will be completely on a different level, that there is an open way to share experiences, I think that makes it so much easier to say, I tried this and it worked. have you heard of that or not? And I think the patient needs to be very comfortable that, you know, we are all in this same boat in order to have the same goal. And the patient needs to have a responsibility to be part of the team, not being treated to, but being treated with. And I think that opens up all new channels and makes it very easy to exchange experiences and what people heard and did not do and what did not work.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think a really good example of where that is really critical can be around clinical trials, for example, and the way that, you know, patients experience clinical trials, because what I find is it's kind of like those metaphors where like everybody's touching something, but nobody knows that it's like an elephant. You know what I'm talking about? It's like nobody really understands, like there's a 360 here with identifying, communicating, but how much work patients have to do for their own clinical trials, how much falls onto them, what burden it is. Like I had no idea about this, how little information is being given, and then how much peer support is really out there. Like where do patients learn about clinical trials? From other patients, right? And so there is an opportunity where patients, and not just a patient, but patients generally, the patient community can educate the oncology community and the research community. This is an area where I feel so strongly that we could all come together and improve this process, which has some room to improve. There's some room for improvement of access to clinical trial and making it feasible for patients.
But Phuong, going back to your question on how to return this, I think the first is collecting the input from a group of patients and then looking at themes and patterns, because that has never been done. Like you said, we've heard from one patient, two patients, three patients, which their experiences are very different. We've never looked at 300 patients, what they do for, let's say, female sexual dysfunction, and then try to put it together and come up with a theme that comes out of it, and then look and see if it can be taken forward, it can be educational. We can even look at an intervention and say, we give it to half and not to the other half. Does it really work out in a population, or is it anecdotal for one individual? I think it is time to think about those kind of interventions.
Hey, Dr. Lenz, you're going to have to get some more grants for us. Yeah, and I think that, you know, Karen, you know, one of my favorite things about our founder for our company, 11 Health, one of my favorite things that he said that always has stuck in my head from the moment I heard it is no decisions about me without me. Patients, get off your butts, learn about your disease and speak up, because, you know, you can't expect. And I was guilty of this from the beginning of my diagnosis. I grew up in a very traditional Asian household where I was told, you respect authority, you do not say no to anything. If the doctor says something, you do it and that's it, don't question. And so this was my mindset going into a major diagnosis. And it was completely different when I started going into the colon club and reading about people who were asking questions, people who were challenging what their oncologists were telling them, not disrespectfully, but just, wait, but this doesn't help me with this, or this quality of life aspect is important to me. I don't want this type of treatment because. And so I started learning all these things, and that changed me, and that changed my conversations with my oncologist, so that I was an active participant instead of just a passive recipient of my care. And that completely changed everything, you know, to the point where Dr. Lenz is my oncologist. So, you know, reveal that, no HIPAA violations, right? It's me. So, you know, one of the things that happened when I started my current chemotherapy protocol was I started having some skin issues, you know, and it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like it was a major impact to my life. But I was like, you know what? Nothing too small, right? Mention it. And he's like, oh, we have a fix for that. Let's just do this. Bang, that cleared up, no more issues with it. It didn't impact my treatment. It's just that level of communication really enhances what you can do. So I would love to take that and large scale, put that together into something that our oncologists can share around.
And I think, I'm speaking on behalf of probably many oncologists. We want to have active patients. We don't want to have passive patients where we don't know what they feel and think. And in order to address, it makes our life so much easier, and to help and to understand what the issues are. Tell us, okay? How can we help when we don't know? And I always like challenges and issues when they're coming up, and something I have not heard from a patient advocacy point. We are all in a process of learning as we go along, and there are always issues we can easily solve and some we can't. But when we are working together, we will solve more than when we do it alone.
Yeah, I have to take the opportunity to challenge here one of the things you just said, and that's like you always welcome a challenge, because I've received a file whack on the head a time or two from you for being at the challenge.
Yeah, and that's normal. That's interaction. Okay?
The squeaky wheel, yeah.
That's
no,
right.
I mean, yeah.
Doesn't mean we have to always agree. Oh, I mean, that's life.
That's true.
This is marriage. This is everything. You share and think what is best for you, and when we agree, it's perfect. If not, we need to find a way how to deal with it. This is I think everyone wants to make the best out of it, and there are issues where I say, this is crazy, don't do that. And that's normal. You can open communicate with it without holding back.
So I think that you guys have heard some of the benefits that we've encountered, a couple of the barriers that we've seen and heard. I think that there's a lot more that can be uncovered, but I think that we should probably pause here for just a moment and just ask if there are any questions that we should address, because I see that time is going to come to an end in a little bit. So.
Hi. I wasn't prepared to really speak, but I feel like I should, because I'm here. And I just wanted to say how much that I appreciate this webinar, because I understand how important it really is for that patient and the researcher or the doctor to have that one-on-one relationship. And I myself as a patient feel almost traumatized because I was misdiagnosed for 3 years. So whenever I finally talk to a doctor and they recognize my issues and believe me and say, okay, let's get tested, da 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 da, and they know about having the Lynch syndrome that I have, I literally want to hug them and say, thank you so much for listening to me. It really means so much. Honestly, I literally want to hug you guys and cry. But so this is just so important, and I really appreciate you two coming together and presenting this for us, and for all of you being here and taking that also into consideration. And I'll definitely, I appreciate also how someone had mentioned that, it's important also for the patients to discuss those things, and you guys learn things from us as well. And I think that's, important to point out too. So thanks, guys. It was great.
Thank you, Danelle. Yeah, I mean, it's really true. One thing we've learned that, it's unfortunate, your misdiagnosis story or not being properly diagnosed, I've heard so often, especially with young people, with young colorectal cancer patients. And a lot of that is, I have a lot of anecdata, that I call it, about that kind of thing. And that really came from, I think, patient spaces and patients talking to, this trend of being misdiagnosed and pushing it until patients really have advanced cancers, because young people don't get cancer and young people don't get colorectal cancer. So I think that patients have hugely raised that issue. It's really thanks to patients that has been on the radar screen of researchers and clinician scientists. So yeah, you do help. You're helping other people, and you're helping people like yourself hopefully get diagnosed earlier and properly.
Yeah, and honestly, I've had an offline conversation with the leadership in another advocacy organization, and we talked about how we're still struggling to obtain the level of funding that we really need. It's been all over the place where we talk about early age onset colorectal cancer really being on the rise. And yet we're still fighting for that funding. And, you know, I half jokingly tease you, Dr. Lenz, about needing to get more grants, but in all seriousness, we could use that money to conduct these studies.
But you know, this is, I think, a wonderful potential project for Kimberly and the Colon Club to collect and really look at the misdiagnosis, to get a document out that when patients look for symptoms and so on, then they see this collection of information that may actually trigger some empowerment for patients to say, you know, but I know this can happen and this can be overlooked. But if it's not collected and documented, it doesn't exist. So yeah. I think that may be a very nice project in order to join forces and come up with a document or report. And you have the power to do that. You know, with 100 or 200 in a day, this is unheard of. You can figure out and collect these and systematically report it. And I think it would be something people could find when they Google, you know, symptoms, and when they're lost and couldn't find and misunderstood and think it's all external hemorrhoids, you know. Mm-hmm. It's just, that would be a very valuable project. Easy, you know, just coming out of that discussion with Danelle.
And Danelle, I mean, I'm sure you could back me up on this, but I think the average of all the people that we talk to, the average number of doctors that they've seen before they get their diagnosis is 2+. So they have gone through at least 2 doctors before they finally are diagnosed. And I certainly was in that category too.
You know, right, just to collect the time, the number of doctors, if people feel like they're not alone in this, it may be very, very important that they feel like they're not crazy, okay? There are things out, other people went through it, and gives them a little bit more courage to insist on a workup or go to another doctor or whatever in order needed to get them better health. Sorry, Kimberly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it's interesting because, you know, there's different levels of advocacy, and one area we're talking about is the idea of advocacy, like self-advocacy. You know, sometimes we call that activated patients, patient engagement. But it's hard, like Phuong said, it's hard to get there. It may be culturally hard for you. You know, it may be because you're young. Young people sometimes, you know, it are not used to. So the process of being a strong advocate may emerge over time after you're a patient, but you're not a patient yet, right? You're like just a person going to your doctor, going to the, you know, emergency department, and you haven't learned to be a self-advocate yet. So I think that's really important. I think the idea of, you know, again, looking at this and trying again full circle, you know, because along with patients being advocates, we also really need medical professionals who listen to patients too. I have to say, Dr. Lenz, you're extraordinary, and we're not talking about you here, but we need the mutuality, you know, where that's why we study patient, you know, physician communication, really, really important area to understand. And I would say, especially with younger people, and within, you know, cultural, ethnic, and racial context, to really understand what works. How do we get patients to first start with self-advocacy, right? It's a whole, like Phuong's on a whole other level. She's a national advocate. She's president of the Colon Club. She's awards and decorated. But I think, how do we get, you know, patients who are just, you know, sort of ordinarily approaching and dealing in, I mean, it's hard, it's intimidating. I'm intimidated by medical doctors. They intimidate me. Why wouldn't they?
but the more the people know about the symptoms and ongoing symptoms, they may ask better questions and
Yes.
put down potential symptoms which raise some, maybe more likely a flag. Okay, I think that will be very, because if you're hesitant and you don't know, maybe you're all crazy, you don't say with the same conviction, you know, I have this and this, and could be, how do we not know that? You know, just give them more power with knowledge, and experience of others will probably force the doctors to listen a little bit better, or force them to think a little bit. I think the more knowledge on the patient and physician sides about these situations, the more likely this will happen less. I mean, it's just a learning process on both sides.
So this
Yeah,
is really
and yeah, I was going to say, in one way that I've seen it changing that we can all be advocates for, especially those of us you know, who are oncologists, are things like patient involvement and inclusion in medical conferences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like ASCO now invites patient advocates, and we'll provide them with free, you know, you can go to them for free. But I really think that we need to have much more integration within our, you know, scientific dissemination, where patients have a voice and inclusion. So that's one way things have been changing, and that would be a great way to be able to have patient voice, you know, in the room with decision makers.
Yeah,
but there are two
absolutely.
different things we should not mix up. One is patient advocacy for patients with cancer, and the other one for the people who are not patients yet, who need to be diagnosed, okay? Where you can be a very important, strong voice, okay? And I think that they don't exclude each other. Both are very important, but your experiences are so important for the ones who have not been diagnosed, to make sure that they ask the right question with certain symptoms, and your experiences and misdiagnosis are the key to avoid them in the future for patients or potential patients and the doctors.
So I'm really excited that this is actually a project that that people are interested in. I do have the emails from your registrations. We'll send out a quick email, and along with the recording, to find out who's interested in participating in this. We'll connect with the other advocacy organizations, and let's make this big. And then we can go from there and see what we need to do with funding and such. But once we get everybody together who's interested, we'll put it together. So you know, we're at the end of time. I want to be mindful of that, because everybody is so zoomed out, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys joining at, you know, these crazy times, and being a part of this. It's also National Doctors Day, so Dr. Lenz, I thank you, and everybody else, you know, all the clinicians, all the researchers, all of you, thank you so much for participating, and we look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.
Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it.